Welcome everyone, Costin here with a discussion about Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires patch 5.2, and to talk about the various consequences that the improvements to the AI have had on campaigns. Now, I've tried playing several campaigns ever since 5.2 came out. This particular campaign, which I actually recorded and uploaded on YouTube, is as Belagar, turn 50, the campaign is won. Well, I did have to declare war on Kislev to take Helpit and achieve the long campaign victory condition of Legendary Grudges, but is completed. In fact, it's more than completed. I'm at 97 settlements that I've occupied, loot, razed, or sacked in these turns. Now, the question is, have the changes that Creative Assembly implemented made it more difficult to deal with AI? Yes. Have they made it so that longer campaigns, which probably was one of their intended purposes, have they made it so that longer campaigns are more interesting? Yes and no. Now, it can be difficult to judge, especially when you're playing a race like the Dwarves, because the Dwarves do have some very significant advantages that do take advantage of what the AI has offered, because you do have guaranteed confederation as the Dwarves. So, for instance, you can get a bunch of armies that the AI recruited and a bunch of territories. So in this particular campaign, Forgrim did quite well. Well, not necessarily exceptionally well, but he did take a good amount of territory. He held it, he had a bunch of armies, and now those armies have become mine. Though the vast majority of the territory in this campaign is territory that I took. Another advantage in this campaign is Grombrindal did well, so I was able to take advantage of that situation for my own benefit. Though it does seem Morafi has decided that she is going to try and stop me. We'll see how all of that goes down. But here's the problem inherently of what CA did. They introduced a bunch of benefits: experience benefits, build order benefits, building priority benefits. So the AI is building settlements at a higher level faster, because one of the things they changed is they increased the priority the AI has in terms of getting its main provincial capital to a higher level. So Nuln, Altdorf, other settlements are tier 5 settlements over here. Torivres, Lothern, they're all tier 5. That is pretty good. And beyond that, they've also made it so that the AI will prioritize good unit recruitment. So the AI factions over here do have really good unit recruitment choices for the most part. Like if we look at Altdorf, we can see they have artillery, they have cavalry, they have infantry from Altdorf itself. That is obviously going to give Karl Franz a good amount of power. Combine that with the better AI recruitment choices, and you do get far more powerful armies. And another thing I've also noticed is that the AI will use heroes far more often than it did before. There are still going to be situations where the AI just has heroes doing absolutely nothing, but I have fought not only higher quality armies, not only more armies in general, but also armies with higher level lords and heroes, which was a problem pre 5.2. But here's the thing. Because those benefits they increased, they gave the AI an experience benefit, they gave it a global recruitment duration benefit. Because those benefits start from the beginning of a campaign, and the AI does always get the same benefits throughout the campaign as opposed to gradually gaining various benefits throughout the campaign, then what it really means is that, like pre-patch, we're still in the situation where the most challenging aspect of the campaign by far and away is the early game. It is certainly a lot more challenging than it was before, and I understand what Creative Assembly is trying to do. They're trying to make it so that the player won't steamroll. But here's the thing, as an experienced player, if we look back at the era of Warhammer 2, this doesn't work quite as well, because people will find a way. Like, if there's anything that is for certain, people will find a way to win even in the worst situations. And the problem that gets created is you make it so that the early game is very brutal, very challenging, and good in that respect, don't get me wrong on that, but it becomes a case of where the mid and late game just end up being a grind. Perhaps more so than it was before, but still very much a grind. So for instance, you know, one turn for over here I had 4 armies of Azag marching against me. I was able to deal with them. I did take some damage, but it does give you an idea that just because the AI is throwing a lot of armies at you, it doesn't necessarily work. So what do I say they would be better served doing? Well, I do like the fact that the AI does recruit better armies. I do like the building priorities, and I even like the fact that they do have that global recruitment duration benefit. But at the same time, I think they have way too many global recruitment slots, so you end up fighting a lot of stacks early on in a campaign. And while the AI can get rid of buildings, reprioritize them, one of the bad tendencies of the AI is that it never gets rid of armies it has. It doesn't ever just like throw an army away of low tier units. So if an AI faction starts winning and it has an army from early on, they won't get rid of it to replace it with a higher quality army. Because this army, for instance, is utter garbage as an example, compared to some of the other things that Karl Franz does have, like, you know, this army that he's controlling, or even this army to some extent. But just in general, other armies. So that is a problem with AI. And another thing is actually to do with the battle situation itself. Just simply because the AI can send a lot of armies against you at once, like I thought battles were like 3-4 stacks coming at me at the same time in this campaign. But just because the AI can throw a lot of those armies doesn't mean that the systems in the game are built to handle it. There are things that CA could learn from Troy, yes, Troy and Pharaoh, when it comes to that. Because, like, one of the problems that happens in this game is, like, okay, you're fighting 3 armies at the same time, but because it takes those reinforcements, sometimes you just rush the initial army, you do as much damage, and then you turn around to the reinforcements. Or, one of the things I've done in this campaign is, like, with things like Iron Drakes or other units that are really good at doing a lot of burst damage, when the AI is spawning, you just put your units at the spawn point where those reinforcements are coming from, and you obliterate them. So the AI just doesn't handle well with regards to reinforcements. The limit of 40 units, it just creates a lot of openings for a player. So it doesn't matter how many armies or high quality it is. You can really make it so that you limit a lot of the AI's capability in a significant number of ways for that. Like, for instance, over here I have fought a battle against Kalankarian with Nagashasara. I just fought it with Belagar's army. Just Belagar, not this army as well. Like, this army just spawned. This Grudge army just spawned. I just fought it with Belagar, and although I was 3-to-1 outnumbered easily, far more so actually when you consider Skaven unit sizes, I was able to win with relative ease by just basically capping the reinforcement points. Now, granted, I did intend to do that. But point is, when you create a difficult early game challenge, you're pushing players to adopt tactics that are going to give them that early game success. And they won't just stop using those tactics because we get to the mid game or late game. So they are having more armies means post-battle loot, because we can take a lot of advantage, which means our empire grows stronger, which means by the mid-late game we're just steamrolling without any kind of opposition. This is why it's important to have gradual AI benefits. Another problem that comes in play over here is that while individual AI factions are much stronger than ever before, AI alliances are a joke. Like, for instance, in this campaign, yes, I did at points fight 3-4 factions at the same time across multiple fronts, like 5 actually, like Malakiv, Warzag, Queek, Tretch, all that. But I was able to engineer these wars in such a way that I was able to really fight them one at a time. Like, for instance, with Warzag, yeah, I fought him. His two of his armies with Belagar defeated them, took Morkheim, which he had taken, got a peace agreement with him. So I took him out of the equation. Then Tretch, well, Drazov was fighting Tretch, so Tretch wasn't really even focused on me. So essentially I ended up having to chase freaking Queek for over 24 turns across this entire territory. He had taken a lot, like all of this, like in the Plane of Bones, had belonged to him. That wasn't a particularly fun experience. And it didn't force me, more importantly, as a player to make any kind of, like, concessions. Like, oh, maybe I should stop because I'm going to be attacked. Maybe I have to play a bit more defensive. I was not in a defensive situation at all. The only defensive situation is, like, when Aranessa declared war on me and I just had to get a couple of units to stop her. Because, yeah, the garrison, between the garrison and a couple of units I could recruit, it was easy enough to destroy Arnesa's armies because she didn't stand a chance. Like, in fact, even her armies, like, while the AI will in general recruit, for instance, this is the only army so far I've seen in this entire campaign where Arnesa actually has artillery, for instance. If she had attacked me with artillery, which she didn't over here, she attacked me with pure infantry. If she had attacked me with artillery, I probably wouldn't have won there. I probably would have had a change dynamic of my campaign. But even if I hadn't been able to do this as quote-unquote quickly, the fundamental issue would have still remained. The AI is bad at coordinating with each other, and when you give a lot of recruitment benefits to the AI early on in campaign, that just means you're dealing with more armies. You can either, if you're capable of dealing with that, you get rewarded so significantly it will carry you for the rest of the campaign. If you can't, you'll lose the campaign. Simple as that. There's no middle ground on this. There's no path in which that doesn't happen. And that is part of the problem, really, over here with this. Like, for instance, this army under Grombrindel, it was in a very precarious position early on when I couldn't federate Grombrindel because Malekith declared war on me very quickly. And he sent 2 full army of Shades. And let's just say this army is not necessarily the best one to deal with Shades. But overcoming that, well, Malekith stood no chance after that particular point. So changing the various AI benefits, but keeping them the same throughout the campaign does create that issue. The problem that we've had since the launch of Warhammer 3, or Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires, and really a problem we've had in Total War for so many years, does remain. The early game is the hardest portion of the campaign, and once you get past that, the challenge is just removed altogether. And you don't even need to do exceptionally well in a campaign for that to be the case. You can do much worse than this, and that principle will still apply. So I do think, like, maybe early on in the campaign they should remove some of those global recruitment slots, not duration. I think the actual improvements they brought, they should keep those, like experience benefits, maybe even more experience. So what I'd say, like, the AI needs better generals later on in the campaign, because they might have good units, but they need better generals, higher experience units. So they should get these kind of benefits gradually. In terms of global recruitment slots and recruitment slots in general, it is ridiculous that the AI can get like 6 stacks within 20, 30 turns or so. And I've certainly seen that in the campaign so far. I would also gradually increase that. Duration, one thing. The AI is not great at using that many armies, by the way. It can, however, be useful if, say, the AI has a massive land territory like this. But I'm thinking to myself, you know, if I was playing Archeon in this situation, would the Empire really present any kind of real challenge to me, even if they control all of this? I somehow doubt it, suffice to say. Like, one of the issues with Warriors Cast is how easily you can trivialize their entire campaign situation. So let me show you Troy, which I think handles this entire situation of mid-late game difficulty in a significantly better way than what Warhammer does, for instance. It's not because it does anything different in terms of the AI benefits, so it would probably be for the better if they did. If, again, gradual increases in power, that would work better. And another thing in Troy, you have the antagonist faction. But let me just go over Troy for a bit. Now, in terms of a Total War Saga Troy, I think this game handled the issue of making a longer campaign more interesting. Don't get me wrong, Troy has a ton of problems. Balancing problems, map design issues, so on and so forth. But in terms of making the AI interesting to deal with in a long campaign and having systems that are interesting in a longer campaign, Troy has done things a lot better. For starters, a lot of the major factions that you do play, they start in a coastal area or in an area where they're easily accessible to factions of the opposite side. So if you're playing the Greeks, you know, if you're playing Mycenae, if you're playing Ajax, if you're playing Achilles, you're going to be vulnerable to coastal invasions from the other side. And on top of that, what's brilliant here is that the game is scripted so that the Trojan War does start fairly early on, roughly 10 turns. Or rather, that the diplomatic aversion is so significant that the war will kick off pretty early on in a campaign. So on one hand, you will get invaded by multiple AI factions working together in your core territory. But you can't just deal with those, call it a day, invade their territory. If you try and do that, that's a surefire way of losing the campaign, because there's many other smaller factions that will also declare war on you. In point of fact, if you become too aggressive, too powerful, many other factions will declare war on you. Like, for instance, over here, I have 2 minor factions, relatively minor factions, that have caused me quite a bit of headache over here over the last couple of turns. And that will happen. So over here in this campaign, I had to spend a lot of turns dealing with Anatolia over here in this area and in this area, while also constantly fending off naval invasions from Achilles, from Odysseus, from Ajax, from Menelaus. So it's multiple factions, and I couldn't control necessarily as a player how they were going to come for me. So that, I think, can create a far more interesting dynamic campaign as opposed to what happens in Warhammer 3, where you conquer territory, you never stop, and if you stop, it's because you're shifting resources around to other fronts, but you're constantly going. Here you have to play both defense and offense, unless you're playing Odysseus. Like, there are certainly campaigns where you can, just take a chill. Like, if you're playing Aeneas, it's like you can just constantly conquer territory without opposition. So it's not perfect, but it creates this dynamic. And this war escalates. Like, a couple of factions will join early on, and then more and more factions. And you're constantly fighting this war throughout the campaign, and it doesn't let up. And later on, what's brilliant here is that they not only will you start consolidating your side, confederating factions and so on and so forth, but so will AI. So for instance, over here, Ajax has confederated Achilles. Though this campaign may not necessarily be the best example, because Mycenae just basically declared war on Argos and Sparta. Weird stuff happening. But you are certainly seeing that level of consolidation happening over here. Like, even, and if you don't personally confederate factions on your side, then other factions will do so as well. Confederating, consolidating, gaining power, and leading to situations where you have a lot of AI factions fighting each other for control. Like, you've got over here Lycia, you've got with multiple armies, you've got the Amazons coming, and you have Ajax, you have myself, we had Achilles over here, we have Dardania, basically Aeneas coming in, like, we have Thrace. Like, this is a glorious messed up war, and something you so rarely see in Warhammer 3. Now, don't get me wrong, the AI does cheat in this game in significant fashion as well. It gets a lot of benefits. But it's not. But AI benefits themselves don't necessarily make a campaign. It's this kind of dynamic that can make a campaign more interesting long term. And while I certainly do hold a good amount of territory, I also don't hold a lot of territory. Like quite a bit of the territory, it was more beneficial for me to give to my allies. Like, look at this amount of territory. This is a turn 62 campaign, by the way, and I conquered a good amount of stuff here, but I am not so ridiculously crazy in terms of how many provinces I own. I own 34 settlements. I have 9 provinces. Think of what you can do in 62 turns in Warhammer 3. Think of what you want to do, how many provinces you would control over there. So yeah, you can play this game in so many different ways, and it does create a dynamic that does work. So that would be something like CA should take from Troy when it comes to like AI scaling longer, campaign difficulty, all that kind of stuff. Like it's when AI factions are working together, when there's events that are, for instance, the Greeks do want to stick together, the Trojans want to stick together. Maybe like that should happen with the Empire, not necessarily initially, but as a bigger and bigger threat morphs, that should happen, for instance, or the dwarves gaining relationship benefits, or the High Elves, instead of Tyrion and Alariel conquering Safri every single damn campaign, just as some examples. Maybe Dark Elves to some extent, kind of, though they're Dark Elves, so there's always that element. Anyway, that's all I had to say. Christine signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned.